Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Emphasis Added, a podcast brought to you by the Houston Law Review. I'm one of your season 7 hosts, Tami Bankole. If you're watching on YouTube, you will notice that there's a new face on this podcast. It is my pleasure to introduce to you one of our season 8 hosts, Alexis Roberts.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexis Roberts. I'm a 2L at the University of Houston Law Center, and I'm excited to serve as co host for this next season of Emphasis Added.
Today, we have a very special guest with us, our very own Professor Berman. Professor Emily Berman is a professor of law, the William B. Bates Distinguished Chair in Law, and Assistant Dean for Faculty Development at the University of Houston Law Center. Professor Berman brings an especially helpful perspective to today's conversation because she clerked for Judge John M. Walker Jr. of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit after graduating from law school. Professor Berman, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great.
So, we always like to begin our show by discussing our guest's background and allowing the audience to become acquainted with who they're speaking with today. I know you're a third-time guest on Emphasis Added, so our viewers might be familiar with you. But to start, could you just tell us a little bit about your clerkship experience?
Sure. So I clerked immediately following my 3L year. And Judge Walker has his chambers in New Haven, Connecticut. And so I moved up there, and he was chief judge at the time. And so he got 4 clerks, whereas most of the circuit judges get 3. So I had 3 co-clerks, and had a really fun and challenging and interesting year, and then headed back to New York after that year was over.
That's so lovely. So, what drew you to clerking, or did you go to law school knowing you always wanted to clerk?
I didn't go to law school knowing, I don't think anything about clerking, actually. But I did know very early on in law school that I wanted to try to go into teaching. And it's one of those sort of boxes to check on your resume if that is the career path that you're looking for. And so as soon as I sort of started down that path, it was something that was definitely on my radar.
So, what was clerking what you thought it would be, or what sort of surprised you about your time with Judge Walker?
Yes and no. I think the most surprising thing was, especially at first, it was super, super stressful because he was relying on you to make recommendations about how he should resolve actual cases with actual people that care about their outcome, and so for the first several months I was super freaked out, both because I felt tons of pressure to get it right just for the people in the cases, but then also I didn't want him to go in to conference with the other people on the panel and say oh, well, here's the answer, and have one of them be oh, except didn't you find this case that says the exact opposite thing? And me having missed that would have been humiliating. So for the first several months it was super stressful, and then eventually I realized okay, I'm not actually making the decisions, he's making the decisions, so all I can do is provide my best recommendation, and then it's on him. And then also once I'd been there for a while and he knew me, it was if I made a mistake or something, it wasn't going to be oh, now he's going to think I'm an idiot for the rest of the year,
Wow, that sounds like such an experience. So, students in law school hear a lot about clerkships and externships, but they may not know the difference of what each entails. I know, as a one, I'm hearing clerkships, I'm hearing internships. I'm what is what? So, can you please explain the difference between a clerkship and an externship?
Sure. So an externship tends to be something that you do while you're in law school. A lot of people do it in the summer, but I think you can probably also do it during the semester if that works out with your schedule, where you would go and work in a judge's chambers and work alongside their clerks for that summer or that semester, however long it is. Clerkships happen after you've already graduated, A lot of people do them sort of directly after graduation, but you don't need to do it immediately. Other people, might work for a year or two and then go back and do a clerkship. So there's no real schedule about when that happens. It's just whatever works out for you and the judge that you end up clerking for.
What did your day-to-day look like as a law clerk? I know it can be a little different at the district court level, at the appellate court level, but as an appellate clerk, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so it was mostly researching things and writing memos or draft opinions. And so we would once we got assigned to a sitting, there would be like a week's worth of cases each month. The judge would sit on a panel and hear cases. And so several weeks before the sitting, the office would send us a box with like all the briefs. And my co-clerks and our judge let us pick the cases that we wanted to work on, which was nice. And so my co-clerks and I would sit around the table and like horse trade about like, I'll give you this case if I can have this case. And then it's just a matter of like digging into the briefs and doing the research and writing what's known as a bench memo saying like, here's the issue and here's how I think it should be resolved for the following reasons. And then you send that to the judge, and my judge was very much like a work on paper person, and so he would like mark up your memo and put it in his outbox, and maybe he might have follow-up questions. The only time he really did stuff like in a conversation is if he disagreed with you. He would be like, come into my office, and, like, here's what I'm thinking, here's why I'm not going to follow, which was nice of him to like let you know he's not going to follow your recommendation. And then there was one time where he disagreed with me, but then the panel voted in favor of my position. He came back and he was like, all right, you win. So
funny.
yeah, so before the sitting, you like do the research and write the memos, and then the sitting happens and arguments take place and the judges go and vote. And then after conference, he would come back to chambers and let us know, like, here's how all the votes came out and these are the opinions that we're responsible for. And so then if our chambers was responsible for an opinion in a case that you had drafted the memo for, then you were mostly responsible for the first draft of that opinion.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, but it's structured too, which is nice.
Yeah.
So, how much does a clerkship differ based on the court? Like, so for example, federal versus state court, district versus appellate. Do you think the work differs much, or it's pretty much the same?
I think it differs a lot depending on the level of clerkship. So, like for appellate clerkships, at least in the federal system, they tend to be like what I described. There's sort of a schedule and a progression of things that's a monthly cycle, if you will, that you can predict and you know what's going to happen. And things will differ in like, how much does the judge want to do his own first draft, or how, does the judge like to assign cases to different clerks? So there'll be differences like that, but the sort of schedule and overall work, I think, tends to be pretty similar in appellate cases, in appellate clerkships. At the trial court, it's sort of whatever happens to be going on in that trial court's docket. So it could be, scheduling conferences or motions practice, or there could be a trial, or there could be a sentencing, and it just totally depends on I think it varies from time to time. And then I also think you're sort of juggling more than one case, because one case might be in the middle of motions as this one gets ready for trial. And so I think it's a little bit more unpredictable and also a little bit more like varied in the type of work you do. I think it's less like super in-depth research, because like you need to like come up with an answer sooner than like 3 months from now or whatever. And I don't know much about state court clerkships, but I would imagine it's a similar story just because of the nature of like a trial court versus an appellate court.
Did you ever get to watch the oral arguments or watch the panel deliberate or anything like that?
We definitely were at all of the oral arguments. We did not go to conference after arguments. They deliberated, just the judges. There are some courts where they'll allow clerks, and I think that's more common in state courts. But yeah, for the Second Circuit, it was just judges, and then they would come and tell us how they came out, but they wouldn't give us any of the scoop on what went down during conference.
Not the juicy stuff. All right. So students are often encouraged to pursue clerkships, but they're not really made aware of all the benefits of clerking. So why do you think clerkships are valuable for young lawyers?
Oh, I think there's so many great things about it. So first, it definitely was massive improvements in my research and writing skills. Like, that's all you do for a year, and you just get better at it because it's lots of practice. And those are skills you're going to use sort of regardless of where your career takes you if you're in the law for the most part. I think one of the maybe more under-recognized aspects of it is like you get an inside look at the judicial process and sort of the things that have been like, the procedural posture that just gets described in the case books. Like you kind of have a sense, but like actually seeing how it happens and where the decisions get made and where the investment of time and energy, and so that's helpful. The third thing I would say is like you see a lot of writing and arguing from other attorneys, some of it excellent, some of it not so excellent. And so it's a real opportunity to see like what makes an effective advocate, and both in writing and in court. And so that's a really useful sort of clinic in that, because if you sit in oral arguments all year, you see a lot of lawyers argue. And then also it's just a great, like, in the same way that I suspect your law review experience is a lot about the people that are on your journal with you in that community. Clerkships are like that in that Chambers is like a very small law firm. It tends to be like the judge and the judge's administrative assistant and then 2 or 3 or 4 clerks. And that's like your whole professional world for that year. And so those are just great, lifelong relationships that you form, and so that part of it's nice too.
That's lovely. And to like follow up on that, so what skills did you get from your clerkship that you still use currently as a professor, as a scholar, and as a mentor?
Yeah, I would say that the research and writing obviously is a big part of what I still do. So that's a lot of it. I think I also am able to, as far as like mentors with students, have these kinds of conversations with people and really encourage them to see the value in having clerked. And so there's also, I suppose, some aspects, like one of the nice things about clerking is like every case that comes in front of you, it's like a whole new area of law that you get to learn about. And so I do feel like it really expanded just my like substantive sense of like what is going on in the courts. And that's just a good thing to have going forward.
Absolutely. So for students who maybe aren't sure if they want to pursue a career in litigation, or maybe they already know they don't want to do litigation, do you think clerking's still a good fit? Are there still valuable skills they can learn?
Oh, for sure. I mean, whatever you do in the law, like good writing and legal thinking are a key to it. So like if you're writing a contract, you may not be planning to litigate, but you're thinking about how can we avoid litigation in the future. And so the more you know about, how litigation works and what tends to create controversy, like that's going to help you do your job better at the earlier stages. So I don't think there's really like maybe if you want to be a litigator, the oral advocacy skills are maybe more interesting to you. But as far as just like a really great learning experience, like in one-on-one with a federal judge who's like knows a lot more about all of this than you do and has been doing it a long time and is like a really good teacher, like a one-on-one teacher for your writing, and that's a really valuable experience, I think, for anyone.
Yeah, that's lovely. Very valid point about, you draft a contract so you don't end up in court, because whenever people are in litigation, they're like, yeah, those contract drafters, they made a mistake. So we all know the clerkship application process can be pretty opaque. So we'd like to shed some light on how students should go about applying to judges. What should current 1Ls and 2Ls be doing right now if they're thinking about clerking?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to think ahead. So one thing to think about is like what goes into your application. And so are there classes that you think judges would like to see you have taken? Like people tend to say like federal courts or criminal procedure or things that have issues that come up if it's a federal clerkship that you're looking for. So one is sort of class. You might want to think about your class selections. Another thing is you want to have a writing sample, and ideally it's something more sort of sophisticated than like something you wrote in LSS. And so thinking about like, when am I going to take an upper level writing class so that I can have a paper that might serve as, or even do I want to join a journal so that I have a writing sample based on my work for the journal that I can give. And then maybe most importantly is you should be getting to know your professors, because recommendations are a big part of the clerkship application, and it matters more for some judges than others. Some judges, they like get to know professors and they say, oh, this person like sent me that clerk and that clerk was awesome, so I'm going to listen to what they have to say. But even without those personal relationships, the recommendations are important, and so the better someone can get to know you and the more aspects of you and your capabilities. So, having had you in class, but also maybe having seen some of your writing and spoken to you in office hours, and so the better you can get to know professors who are ultimately going to be your recommenders is important too.
Oh, great advice. How should students go about applying or creating their list of judges? People say, should they do targeted applications? Should they cast a wide net? What was your approach?
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, it depends on your situation. Like, I knew I wanted to clerk, and I knew I was willing to go anywhere for a year, and I knew I preferred an appellate clerkship. So I basically applied to like appellate judges all around the country, and a few district judges in places that I would sort of most like to live, I guess. But, not everyone has that kind of geographic flexibility. And so it may be that you want to target a particular metro area. And so within Houston, maybe if you have family obligations or whatever keeps you in Houston, you can apply to, appellate judges and trial court judges and state court judges and magistrate judges and bankruptcy judges. Like, there's all different kinds of judges in any one given area that you can also focus sort of that way. And then I would say in some ways, just like the broader you are willing to apply, the likelier you are to get a clerkship. I mean, it's one of those things where like there are just like a lot more qualified people than there are positions. And so, if you're willing to go to like the District of North Dakota for a year, like they probably get a lot fewer applications than the Southern District of Texas gets. And so, thinking sort of strategically in that way about like, how important is it to you to clerk? How important is it to you to clerk at a particular kind of court? And then that might drive some of your application strategies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are the major components of a clerkship application?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that, but there'll be a cover letter, which can tend to be like pretty generic of like, why do I want to clerk, or at least generic for appeals court judges, and then another generic one for trial court judges. If there's some particular connection you have with a judge, or they're like, my whole family lives in North Dakota, like, of course I would be thrilled to come there. So if there's a particular connection, you might want to raise that. So there's cover letter, there'll be your resume, your transcripts, your writing sample, and your recommendations. And I think that usually is it. It might differ from, some judges ask for like your undergraduate transcripts or recommendations from like your pre-law school employer if there was one or something. So there are certain judges that might ask for something different, but those are sort of the basics.
Yes, and I definitely recommend to anyone applying, read the Oscar listings very closely, because some judges will, require 3 recommenders or 2, or they'll want you to have recommenders plus references. So read them very closely. Make sure you're following the instructions they give you. How important is that transcript, and how should students think about explaining weaker grades, if they should at all?
Yeah. So it really depends on the judge. Most judges tend to have their clerks go through the applications, taking the first pass. And there are some judges who say, if they're not on law review, not in top 10% of the class, don't even send them to me. But I think that's not most judges. There are a few like that where the transcript's going to be really important. But I think a couple of things. One is, if you have 1 or 2 lower grades early on and you can show like an improvement over time, it's just like with employers, they can see that. And so that's one way to deal with grades you're not super excited about, is like, get better ones the next semester. Easy, right? So there's that. The other thing is, if it's in a class where you know the professor and you participated and you have a good, maybe you had like a really bad day on exam day, one of the best ways to deal with the grade is to get that professor to write a recommendation and say like, didn't come out the way that either of us had hoped, but I don't think this reflects, the experience that I had with this student. So that's another way to do it.
That's really great advice.
Yeah, that is. I know you spoke a little bit about, you mentioned Oscar, so some of our audience may not know what Oscar is. So can you please tell us what Oscar is and how students should use it?
Yeah, so Oscar is, and to be clear, I'm old, and so Oscar came like long after my time of clerkship applications, but Oscar is the electronic application system. And in some ways it's like it's like applying to law school. You like upload your transcripts and it's all centralized, and any judge, you check the box of which judges you want it to go to. And so that is more efficient than like stuffing 100, envelopes and putting them in the mail. But not all judges use it. Not all judges use it in the same way. Judges use it on different schedules. So I think it is probably handy for researching judges and trying to figure out, like, do they use Oscar? Do they not? What is their hiring time frame? Do they say in their Oscar posting, like, I like to hire at this time of year, or that sort of thing? So it's both a a mechanism for making the hiring process just like logistically easier, but then also a potential source of information about the judges and their processes and what they're looking for.
We love some efficiency.
And we do love efficiency.
Yeah.
Yes, and we chatted a little bit about this, but people will hear about the plan, the federal clerkship hiring plan. Can you explain a little bit about what the plan is?
Yeah. So the plan is sort of an effort to impose some sense of structure on an otherwise like super chaotic process, and rather than having like every judge act on their own timeline, try to have like uniform, like this is the sort of application deadline, and judges aren't supposed to look at applications before that day, and then there's another date through which after which they can start scheduling interviews, and then there's another date after which they can start giving offers, and all of it is meant to like slow things down a little bit so both the judges and the people that are interviewing have some time to like prepare for the interview, to not feel like you have like the judges don't have to like make offers to the first 3 people they meet, and so applicants aren't like trying to decide, like I have interviews offered to me in this city and that city, like which one do I go to? So it's aimed at making it a little more structured and predictable. I think it is not fully effective, I should say, in that regard, just because judges aren't obligated to go by it. And a lot of them don't, and some of them do it when it comes to 2L students, but they don't do it when it comes to 3Ls or graduates. And so the chaos definitely remains. But it's also, worth knowing, like, are the judges that you're applying to, do they use the system, and therefore here's the deadline by which I need to apply, and then here's the day that I can like start hoping my phone rings.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I know currently from my application process is that 2Ls can't even access Oscar until April of their 2L year. So you can't even go in and look at the list of judges yet until April, and then you can start getting your applications together, but the judges can't access them until June. And now recently Oscar sent an email explaining that the plan has been updated. So this year on Monday, June 8th, that is when judges will be able to see 2L's clerkship applications. They can see if 3Ls or graduates are applying right now, they can see those. But not until June can they see the 2L applications, and they can't contact applicants until the next day, June 9th, and then it's not until June 10th that they can conduct the interviews and make offers. So they've added another, it used to be that there was a day to look at the applications, and then the next day you could start interviewing and offering, but now they've added that extra 24 hours, like Professor Berman said, to, I think, reduce them offering the first 3 people that they see, and then there's no more seats to go around. So that's kind of the 2026 timeline. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, but yes, and on Oscar it'll tell you if that judge is taking just online applications or if they're taking paper applications as well. You can always mail in your application and see if you might get an interview before June.
Thanks for that information, Alexis.
Of course.
So we've discussed sending out applications, which is a very big step in the clerkship process. The next thing is hopefully to get called for an interview, which I think is an honor to get called for an interview for a federal judge. So if a student is invited to interview, what can they do should they expect from a clerkship interview?
Yeah, sort of like the clerkships themselves. It depends a lot on the judge. So like my judge, I didn't know this at the time, but now I know that once he's interviewing you, he feels like, okay, this person has like checked off the qualification boxes. And at that point, he's looking for like fit. Like, is this somebody that I want to have around my office for the next year? Is this someone that I think is going to get along with these other two people that I already hired that are going to be around my office? And so he was all about like harmony within chambers, which, you know, that's great. Some judges care less about that. So his interview was more just like a sort of get to know you, like what was your favorite class in law school and what was your paper about and that sort of thing. I think other judges are going to be, you know, much more rigorous legally. You should definitely be prepared to talk about anything that's on your resume. Definitely be prepared to talk about any writing sample that you sent in to them. It's helpful to do a little bit of research about both the judge and the court on which they sit. Not because a judge is going to expect you to have read all of their opinions, but like, you know, if there was a major decision that just came out of that court recently, or if there was a super high profile opinion that the judge wrote, like it's good to be aware of that, even if, you know, it's not going to be like the heart of the interview. So yeah, I think being sort of aware that sort of anything could come at you. And one thing I should say, and I should have mentioned this about when, you know, picking your list of judges, is you should talk to the CDO, the people in your career office, because they know more about the individual judges and their hiring practices and who tends to hire from your school and what their schedule's like and what do your grades have to be, that sort of thing. But then also, I would guess they will do mock interviews, which is always a good idea. Just and definitely have that answer for why do you want to clerk, because that's sort of an obvious one that sometimes people don't think about. Because like, of course I want to clerk. Why would I be here? It's like you don't want to be deer in the headlights for that one.
I know that our CDO here at UH, they have a lot of resources, and they can connect you with, you know, former clerks of that judge. Did you ever get in contact with Judge Walker's former clerks before your interview or anything like that?
I did not.
That's a good way to get some insight about how that particular judge works. It's also your professors are a great resource, I found, because, you know, Professor Berman might write a recommendation letter for someone who now is clerking, and then when someone else asks her, she can say, oh, I know someone who's clerking for that judge right now, and here's their info. So lean on the faculty and staff at your school.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So I know like a lot of interviews, not even just clerkship interviews, but job interviews, whatever. After they've asked you the questions, they usually end with, so do you have any questions for us? What kind of questions do you think an applicant should have at the back of their head to ask a judge that will impress the judge after the interview?
Well, I think one thing to ask is like, what is the role of clerks in your chambers? What kind of work do they do? What are the expectations? I think you probably don't want to ask like what kind of hours do they work, just because that might imply that you're not wanting to work long hours. But you might ask questions that sort of get at what is the sort of work ethic in this chamber. Like my judge, he had a 12-year-old daughter, and he like clockwork, he left at 5:30 and he was not there on the weekends. And we often stayed after he left to finish up whatever we were doing that day, but there was no like weekend FaceTime. You know, and some people are like, my judge works all the time, and anytime he's in the office, we're supposed to be in the office. So trying to sort of suss out those situations can be useful. But I think mostly it's about, you know, what is this job? You can also ask like, What have your clerks gone on to do? So, judges love to talk about their former clerks that are like this and that and the other. So you can ask, because, some judges are known for like, oh, their clerks tend to go into academia, or they tend to go into like these particular firms or whatever. So there's that kind of question too.
So some students might still be unsure if they're a good fit or whether they're unqualified. We talked about how there's definitely more applicants than there are positions. So what do you say to students who think clerkships aren't for them or that they might be unqualified to apply?
Well, there's no harm in applying, right? If it's something you want to do, you should pursue it. And not every clerkship is as competitive as, the federal circuit courts and district courts. There are magistrate judges in every district that do the exact same work as the district court judges do. They're not Article 3 judges, and the district court judges, they don't issue like final opinions. They basically like get reviewed by the district court judges. But often a district court judge will just say like, for the reasons laid out in the magistrate's opinion, here's what I decide, because it's literally the same work that magistrates are doing. So you get that same insight in a much less competitive context. Also, there's specialized judges. So there's bankruptcy court. So if you're interested in financial issues, that's something there. The Texas Business Court is now up and running. I think they're in their like second or third year. And so if you're interested in sort of corporate law issues, that's another place that I think they probably don't get as many applications, because I don't know how many people know that they're around these days. So that's one thing I would say is there are lots of different clerkships to apply for, and you can apply really broadly and raise your chances. And then the other thing I would say is don't think of it as like, oh, I applied and I didn't get a clerkship. I guess I didn't get a clerkship. Like, you can apply year after year after year if you want to. And there are some judges that prefer clerks who have had some working experience. So say you don't get a clerkship while you're in law school, you go work at a firm or whatever you do for the first year or two that you're in practice. That's going to make you more appealing to certain judges. And especially if, you don't have the shiniest resume or transcript, but like you've done really well in your job and you have partners that are going to go to bat for you with a judge, like you might improve your chances by waiting to do it, after you've had a couple of years of experience under your belt.
Great. Thanks so much for those words of encouragement. Like, that would definitely hopefully help people who think they're still unqualified. So like, as I said, when I came to law school, I didn't know what clerkship was. So are there any other words of encouragement you want to give to first-generation law students on how to navigate the clerkship process and, what resources those students should use if they don't know where to start?
Yeah. So one thing is, I would say it's one of those things that, like, about law school that, like, if you don't know, you don't know. And don't be intimidated by it, but it can be like a very powerful credential on your resume. And this is something that maybe lawyers who aren't thinking about litigating should think about. Like, there are significant bonuses that firms give for people who clerk. So even though maybe you're foregoing that first year of law firm salary, they don't fully make up for it with the bonus, but it is a tidy sum of money, depending on the firm. So that is people should know that is a nice byproduct of clerking. But also I would say, like, talk to the CDO, talk to your professors, get a sense of like, what does clerking, get you? What does it do for you? And therefore, is it something that you want to pursue? But then also knowing what makes it more likely that I'm going to get a clerkship early on also helps. So like, I think most judges want their clerks to have been on a journal just because of the research and editing experience that comes with that. And so if you come into law school and you've never heard of a clerkship, maybe you don't know that you should really be trying to get on a journal. And so I would just say, early on, ask mentors, whether they're upper level students or professors or career office people, and just sort of get the lowdown and see if it's for you and what your next step should be.
That's great advice.
That's great advice.
And I think also you talked about the Texas Business Court briefly, and we talked a little bit about externships and internships. Tami and I both have worked for Judge Adrogué at the Business Court. It's Division 11A. Not all the Business Court judges have interns, but she does. And so I think that's also a great way to sort of know if you want to do the kind of work that clerks do, is by getting some of that experience in chambers working with a judge.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it gives you a sense of like, what do clerks do? And I don't know how many judges hire former interns. I know sometimes they have policies, like I've known judges who have policies like against hiring. If they teach a class, they have policies against hiring their students because they don't want like the whole semester to be like an interview. And so there might be judges that have the same thing with interns, but maybe not. And if you clerk for one judge and you really wow them, they might not hire you, but they might tell a colleague on the court, like, hey, I had this stellar intern, you should look for their application, And there'd be and judges are great recommenders. If you have an internship with a judge that's willing to write a recommendation.
Very true. Or even even just a reference, a phone call that can absolutely help you. I hear a lot that the judges have the grade requirements, but a lot of people have the top 10% or top 20% or whatever grade. So the recommendations, like you said, the recommendations and the references can definitely pull your application to the top. So to close, we'd love to hear some personal reflections from you. What is some advice you might give to students who feel intimidated? I know we've talked about that a little bit, but just to close us off.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's the kind of there's a lot of these things in law school where it's like, what is journal? What is outlining? What are exams? And it's like, clerkships can be demystified just like all of those other things can. And so just because it's an unfamiliar topic doesn't mean you should shy away from it. You're perfectly, you figured out how to outline, right? You can figure out what it means to clerk in that same way. And so I would just encourage people to think about it, regardless of what your career path is going to be. I still am in touch with my co-clerks. My judge is actually having a clerkship reunion next weekend that I can't go to. But his clerks get together once a year, and that's a whole other network for you to be plugged into. And so there are just a lot of great intangible benefits in addition to the hard skills and the potential clerkship bonus that you get from a law firm.
Of course, that's a huge plus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Professor Berman, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Emphasis Added. It's been truly an honor. Before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, whether advice for students, reflection on your journey, or anything else on your mind?
I don't think so. I would just foot stomp the idea of think about it. Even if it's not you, maybe you decide it's not for you for whatever reason, think about it.
Okay, great advice. Thank you. It's been a great, great honor serving as one of Season 7's hosts for the podcast Emphasis Added. For our listeners tuning in to this episode of Emphasis Added, make sure you follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Tami Bankole signing out. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.